Recording later on as guests come in. Okay, here we go. So before we get started, to share a little bit about management cues. So at Management Cues, we share and specialize techniques that are tactical for managers. We're scientifically proven to work and backed by neuroscience. And so what that means is that we've taken a look at the experiences that managers have, and we've tailored training and delivery of tools to ensure that they can actually go out in the workforce and apply what they've learned. So that's a little bit about us. Feel free to check us out, and we'll mention a little bit more towards the end. But what we're going to cover today is going to be this. We're going to cover what a job description is, what essential components and elements of it make it strategic in the workforce. We're going to cover what's essential and what isn't. And we're going to break down the different areas of what every job description should have or consist of. And so the reason this is really amazing is because, one, it's seldom trained on, at least in my own experience, and I would love to hear from you. But also, we tend to only look at job descriptions in the recruitment process. And in my operational experience, that's a total miss and fail. So we'll close it out and then go through key takeaways. Okay. All right, here we go. So first, we're going to start by taking a really quick poll. Okay, so we're going to take a poll, and the question that you're going to be answering is, have you ever received training on how to utilize job descriptions as a workforce tool? Okay, and just go ahead and be honest as we launch this poll and get a feel for what people have experienced out there. Okay, so I went ahead and launched it. Let me know if you could see the survey on your end somewhat. Okay, great. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Let me know if you could see the results on your end. And you could use the chat to just let me know if you could see the results on your end. Yes, okay, great. So Sharon, thank you for participating. So let me know if what you've experienced has been strictly with regard to the recruiting process, or have there been other areas in which you've been trained on? And you feel free to use the chat. Okay, and what kind of areas were you trained on? Like, was it with regard to recruiting? Was it with regard to other operational areas in the environment? Okay, recruiting and operations, great. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and keep on going and learn a little bit more about kind of the intricacies of utilizing a job description. So job descriptions often get overlooked once the recruiting process ends, right? So my experience has been that once we're done recruiting, once we're done placing, and there are no issues taking place in the environment, we kind of forget about the job description. And the reality is that job descriptions are a phenomenal tool for managers and employees. And so that is just one thing to think about and consider, is how often do you refer to the job description? Savvy managers and leaders leverage them as a powerful resource to guide team success. So people that really know how to kind of hone in different roles and functions in the workforce refer to the job description quite often, right? So it becomes a tool in their tool belt that they access all the time. And so job descriptions are essential in the workplace because they provide a clear, informal translation of the roles and responsibilities that we each have. And clarity is a very common area where people have conflict, miscommunication, and struggles. And so when that takes place, it's usually anchored right back to job descriptions. So it's important to keep job descriptions updated and front and center. And so the other thing that you're going to learn is, do you keep it front and center, right? And what does that look like? Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So at Management Cues, we always start with fundamental lessons to kind of set the footing for everybody, right? So the job description is a formal document outlining the responsibilities of an employee. It defines the skills and qualifications necessary for the role. It should be designed collaboratively between the recruiter and HR leader and the hiring manager for accuracy and alignment. So that's another area that I think is part of the secret sauce in having effective job descriptions and then executing them well, is that it has to be designed with management in partnership. And so if that's not happening, that's when you start to miss components of a job description. But it is a practical tool for managers to reference daily in day-to-day operations. And that really translates over to operational excellence. And we'll talk a little bit about why. So here's some essential elements that every job description should have. Okay. And this is kind of best practice. And so managers, if you really understand a role design, if you really understand why it's important to have clarity around the functions of a role, you're going to know that these are the essential elements that you need to look for. And so we're talking about a targeted job title, overview of the company, bulleted list of key responsibilities, list of required skills, list of qualifications, the job purpose, right? What is the purpose of you even doing this job and how does it align with the company? Job objectives, expectations of the role, conditions that have to be met, and the reporting hierarchy, right? What does organizational alignment look like coming into this role? And then the type of employment that it is. And so we'll break that down even further as we move through it. But just really quick in the chat, have you seen these elements missed, any of these elements missed in any job description you've ever had? And that's a yes or no, right? Yes. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks for participating. Yeah, it's interesting as yes. Okay, great. Great. Thanks for participating. So as we move through it, you'll start to see what's missing, which again carves out an excellent competitive advantage for you as a manager, because you start to be able to augment these areas by knowing what to look for. So job description, in management use looks like this, right? It's used to clarify expectations. And what that means is it helps clearly define roles and responsibilities so your team knows what's expected. So I can tell you from my own experience, the one thing that I see miss in job descriptions is the handoff between roles, which creates overlap, confusion, and also conflict if it comes down to an authoritative area. It always goes back to a poorly written job description. So guide performance reviews. So when you're conducting performance reviews, they should be aligned and directionally related to what's on each person's job description. So as a manager, you use job descriptions to track performance and align it with the goals, right? So it all has to make sense. It's like a symphony. Every single stroke, every single sound, every single action has to be related. And so we have disconnect when we don't have that kind of synergy happening through a job description. It enhances recruitment. So yes, this is probably the most popular part of a job description as a tool. It helps us attract the right talent by posting detailed and accurate job descriptions, but this is just the beginning. It's not the completion or the full execution of a successful, well-written job description. It helps us as managers identify training needs. So if you're not referring back to the job description and looking at the individual in front of you and assessing whether they actually meet all of the requirements or conditions or expectations of the role, we're not referring back to the job description as a tool. And so there's a disconnect. It supports career growth. So a job description helps us align succession planning for each team member. And so if there's no connection there, you're not utilizing the job description in an effective way. And then it helps us stay compliant. The way that a job description is written, if it's done well, mitigates risk for you as a manager and as an employer, and it guides you through the use by focusing on essential functions of that role. Again, same question, just because I'm curious. Have you seen any of these areas missed in your work experience? And that's just yes or no. Okay, great. So it's irrelevant. So you'll get a copy of this deck. So this will be something that you can go back to the workforce and connect the dots and use and even coach people on, which again helps you carve out a really great competitive advantage. And if you have any comments or points of discussion, feel free to pause me and unmute and comment, okay? We have a small group today, so since it's small, we can definitely have some discussion moment. So here's one thing that I think is really important, right? The difference between essential function and non-essential functions. So this is something that, again, needs to be defined so that you know that the focus of this role is going to lend to an organizational objective. So an essential function is a responsibility that is critical to the job's purpose, right? What is the purpose of this role? The reason the job exists, right? The whole reason this job description is necessary is because this particular function needs to be met. And that's why this role even exists, right? It's highly specialized and requires for a skill or experience. So if it's an essential function in the company or in that role, it is a necessary thing, right? It's not something that the role can exist without. And this is really important. How many times have we seen people who aren't a fit for the role, but yet they're in it? It's because this essential function process of strategy never happened, right? Non-essential function is a responsibility that is less vital to the job's purpose. So it's something that's easy to train. It's something that we can have somebody start from scratch and learn, right? It's different. It's not necessarily essential to the role. Complementary to the job, but not a defining reason for it. So it's not the reason that this job exists. It can be easily learned or completed by another team member, right? So non-essential, not the core purpose of the role. So breaking this down further, understanding the distinction between the essential and non-essential functions for managers and employees alike is really important, because that's where the emphasis should be. And it should be seen that way in job descriptions as well. So essential functions are the core duties that define a role. These tasks are fundamental to the job and must be performed by the employee with or without reasonable accommodation. So this is something that has to be part of what they do and execute on, right? So again, as a manager, knowing this, that's where you focus the support around. That's where you focus defining in the detail, right? Non-essential functions, on the other hand, are helpful. They complement the role, but are not critical to the role's core responsibilities. While they may enhance performance, the job would still exist if they didn't do those things. And so making those distinctions helps us be more effective as managers, because we focus on the things that matter and we work for impact, not output, which is another great training that we're going to put out there. But impact is what you want to focus on. So task statements, right, within a job description. So task statements are what we typically see in bullet points, okay? And it's basically the things that describe what people are doing. But here's the thing and the value behind task statements. Task statements are the portion of the job description that describes the methods, procedures, and techniques by which the role duties are going to be executed. So think about that flow for each bullet point you've ever seen. And if that has been included, the method, the process, and the technique that you need to use to do it well. So again, just because I'm just very curious about what the audience is thinking, do you feel that each task has connected these dots for you in the past? And just a yes or no, right? No. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, it doesn't include the method. Okay. Thanks, Trish. So, if one or two are missing, the task statement is incomplete. you're in essence not telling the person what exactly is required of them. So here's where we go wrong, and it's design, right? Like it's these little details that nobody trains us on, but make so much sense, once you hear it for the first time. To craft effective job description task statements, it's important to focus on clarity, specificity, and the key responsibilities associated with the role. So there has to be an art form to this for you to then manage easily and competently and be able to raise expectations. So these are the components that really make the job description such a valuable tool for managers. So here are some key elements, okay, that can help in these areas when you're partnering with HR, or when you see that it's lacking in your environment and maybe this is creating a problem for the team, right? For those around yourself, maybe, and those around you. So action verb, right? Start with the strong, clear verb that describes the task: manage, develop, coordinate, right? Like, what are they doing? What are we requiring them to do? Task, clearly define the task or responsibility. So is this a task? Is it a responsibility? There's distinctions there, right? Like, what is expected of the role? Purpose, explain why the task is performed and its intended outcome. So not just, take the bucket, dump the water out, bring it back and put it back into storage. There has to be an intended outcome behind these tasks for them to really know what it looks like to perform. And that's how you can anchor it back to performance reviews. Tools and methods, include any tools, systems, or methods that the employee will use, right? You're giving them the plan to succeed in each task or responsibility by defining it this way. So required qualifications, what that means, and this is important because if your team member doesn't have the required qualifications, you as a manager have to take a look at how you're going to mitigate that risk, right? And that's why it matters when you start to see it show up in day-to-day operations. So required qualifications are these things: education level, experience, ability, general knowledge, essential physical requirements, hard skills, and soft skills. So when you're looking at writing qualifications, this is where you should focus, right? And it's important that each thing is defined the way that it should be, not the way that we think it should be. Like, this is best business practice. So this is what should fall under that category. Working conditions. This is what working conditions means. And this portion is probably the most relevant part to management, because during the execution of work, we have to ensure that working conditions are met legally. So if this isn't defined well, you're looking at a potential claim. You're looking at open risk for lawsuit. You're looking at safety and health being compromised, right? If these aren't well segmented and defined. So this is what working conditions means. It means the physical environment, working hours, working patterns, wages and salary, workload, and overtime arrangements. So again, curiosity just always gets me. Which of these have you seen missing in the past in your job descriptions? Just any of these that you can remember were missing. Okay. Overtime arrangements, working patterns. Okay. Yeah. And those, think about California labor law links us to compliance in those areas. So the reality is that from a policy perspective, it's probably well defined in every single company, the expectation. But is it provided clearly to employees? No. And then do we get frustrated with trying to backpedal on something we could have laid out on a job description? The answer is yes. And it's because of this, because this hasn't been well defined, right? So what does desired qualifications mean? So thank you for participating, by the way. It adds so much value to this recording and to the learning taking place. So desired qualifications, this means preferred education, preferred knowledge level, preferred certifications, preferred personal characteristics, preferred physical abilities, preferred years of experience. So same question. Which of these have you seen missing in your past experience with the job description? Physical abilities. Yep. Yep. And so here's the thing, right? People sometimes, when they're working on these things, shy away from it because there's so much legality around things, but as long personal characteristics as well. Yes. So people are scared. They're scared because they think it's an opening for a lawsuit, but there's a right or wrong way to outline these areas and align them with the role and function of the job. And that's the key, right? The key is that you really have to understand what the role requires, why it's important to the company, and why it has to align with who you're bringing to the table, right? It's why it's strategic if you're doing it effectively. So updating job descriptions. So this is a big pet peeve of mine because I feel like this opens up operationally everybody to risk and to a lot of frustration and to a lot of team conflict when we fail to update job descriptions. So here's how it should work, okay? And I'm the kind of operator that likes to keep things dialed in sync and on schedule because that is what makes it easier for everybody. So one, you should update job descriptions at least once a year. Two, when you're creating new positions, you need to update job descriptions when making changes to a position. You should be updating job descriptions during organizational shifts, during technological shifts, in response to regulatory changes, as an outcome of annual performance reviews. And what that means is if in the performance review as managers, you're seeing that and hearing that the team member is saying, the job I was hired for is not what the job looks like now, it's time to update the job description. There's merit there. And if you don't, you have risk of misclassifying the role. You have a potential employee claim there, and maybe even a legal claim because of the failure to know when to update job descriptions. So just give me the number when it comes to job descriptions. Which of these have you seen missed in your environment? And if it's all of them, just say all of the above. Okay. Okay, well, Ms. Sharon, you have a lot of operational excellence to speak to now. Okay, so we have two, which was creating new job positions, four, which is during organizational shifts, and three, when making changes to a position, and six, in response to regulatory changes. Great, thank you, Trish. Yes, so important, right, to know that this is when you should take action. This is when you should bring it up. And of course, we're not always in charge of that decision to change, but you should at least be able to advise, right? As a competent, effective, knowledgeable manager. So we're going to jump into California because California is so special. We are so incredibly litigious that understanding the anatomy of a job description in this way positions you to be not only more competitive, but to actually mitigate risk for the employer. So here are some things around job classification. Okay, so job descriptions are actually really, the legislation of California is embedded in this structure that I just shared with you guys. Job classification is assigned based on a majority of duties and responsibilities. California actually has a standard of occupational codes for almost every role that exists out there, which means that there's a legal framework that outlines how each role should be defined, which is interesting because I don't know that managers know that very often and refer to it, right? To see if they're even in compliance. Classification is based on the job assignment, not the person who occupies the job. So it's important to make those distinctions, right? If you're creating a job description and you're defining it based on somebody in your environment, you're already opening yourself up for risk because of this legal fact in California. HR regulations and hiring decisions are based on job classification. So there's actually a standard of codes, which I can share with you guys in a follow-up email so that you guys can take a look at is your job in there, and how is it, how is it framed? Because it positions every single employer to have a base of how they define a function in their role according to the law. So it's very interesting. Did you guys know that? Did you guys know that California had classifications for jobs and job codes for almost every single job out there? Okay, yeah. I'm telling you, the things that we train on in management cues is things that I know are missed because I learned from experience going up through my career path. And so I'm very confident in the areas that we train in, because I know that they're gaps, they're needed, they're missing. So here's some more legislation in California. And I know we might be running a little bit over. We got started a tiny bit late. So if you could stay on, please do. If not, I will continue recording and sharing it with you. So these are the legislation in California that tie back to job descriptions. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, right? Components of how you write a job description will be pulled or come up if there's a claim for discrimination. So if your job description is not updated, if the qualifications and requirements are not clear or appropriate and don't fall in line with the classification for California, you may have a big, wide lawsuit on your hands, right? Age discrimination. The ADA restricts employers from discriminating against people over 40 based on age. So if your job description is speaking to something discriminatory, that's one of the first pieces of evidence that are going to be called. That and performance reviews, right? Like that is going to come up. And so there is value in keeping things dialed in, updated, and to have the right type of discussion around this incredible tool that everybody seems to ignore, in my opinion. So we have here, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that prohibits discrimination, based on race, sex, national origin, and religion. And so we have all of these things that we have to look for and add in for it to be a functional, actual tool. And then last but not least, the FLSA, which is what requires the minimum wage and overtime. And this really ties back to classification, because whether you're salary or hourly, that has to be clearly stated and outlined in a very specific way in a job description. And if you're having a claim, an employee claim that's related to classification, that's the legislation that it will fall on under, and the job description will be one of the exhibits that are called. So here are some key takeaways from this brief and insightful webinar. Job descriptions are a tool for managers. There are essential elements to any effective job description. There is a difference between essential and non-essential job functions. Effective managers know the meaning behind every aspect of a job description. And California has multiple areas of law that are anchored in job descriptions. Poorly written and executed job descriptions can create legal risk for companies. There is a legal framework behind job descriptions. Job descriptions should be updated routinely. All right, so with that said, feel free to unmute if you wanna say anything or provide any comments or have questions. Did you feel like you learned something new in this brief and quick webinar? Yes, definitely. Okay, great. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. We make our webinars really brief for our managers to have kind of a quick brainstorm going on and hopefully light up some neurons. So Management Cues provides training and support resources, right? We provide tools that are accessible. We provide custom training programs that have been crafted to show managers how to perform in a tactical way, which is a little bit different. We move away from concept and theory, and we do that intentionally because this is the kind of stuff that's missed, is the how-to and the why. And so with that said, make sure you check out our website if you haven't already. And I thank you for joining us in this brief webinar and hope that you join future ones. Take care.